Good afternoon and welcome back to the home studio. This is part one in a two-part evaluation of the Jager F-118 G from Ruike Knives. This knife was sent to me by Gear for Life. I want to thank them for making this review possible and very quickly point out that I received nothing in the way of compensation for making the review. I received nothing from downstream purchases of the product from the Gear for Life website. And most importantly, I guarantee that you will get the same review whether I receive a product for evaluation or I purchase it out of my own pocket. Well, knives. Very emotional topic, just like flashlights, headlamps, almost any other gear item. We all have our favorites. We all have brands. Yes, I'm the same way. I have brands that I have many, many years of experience with. I built up a huge amount of trust by using them out in the field. Those include knives from ESEE, Spartan, Emerson, Zero Tolerance, just to name a few. And I will point out that beyond EDC, my personal use case is night, wilderness, search, and rescue. And the two knives that I've used the most in SAR Ops are these two, the ESEE 4 and 5. The 4 is probably the closest in terms of size and weight to the F-118. I'll probably be doing a few comparisons with this knife. I also want to show you an actual use case in the field in a search and rescue training exercise. This was a land nav exercise where I was navigating a shortcut, came along a gully, tree had fallen down, drug a lot of thick vines with it, and I won't say it was completely impassable, but if I tried to make my way through it, there was a pretty good chance of getting myself stuck. Then I have to battle with getting unstuck. It was just easier to take the time and clear it out so I can make an easy transition through that obstacle. It also saved me about a mile to a mile and a half in terms of backtracking. So I'm going to show you a before and after photo, and this represents how I actually used a knife in a search and rescue land nav exercise. Now, that clearing process was done with this, the ESEE 4, and when I got back home, all I did is I stropped the blade with a leather belt and went on my way. So I wanted to give you that introduction to give you a little bit of perspective on how I look at knives as tools. For the rest of the review, I'm going to spend a couple of chapters talking about the F-118 itself, where I think it fits in this broad universe of knives. Then I'll talk about the sheath. Then we'll take it out to the LBJ grasslands and give it some serious stress testing. All right, I'm probably going to do the conclusion of the review here at the beginning, but I think this is a very important segment because it may affect whether or not you want to continue watching some of the field testing. Where does this knife fit in the universe of knives? My personal belief is that this is a value for the dollar. Some people would call it a budget knife. Budget does not mean a deep dive to the bottom of the barrel. It just simply means a knife that is intended to do a number of things reasonably well, even though it may not be the best knife for one specific individual use case, and it does so at a very attractive price. As of right now, when I'm recording this video, this knife is available on Amazon, for example, for $79. So it's a sub $100 knife, again, at the time I'm recording this video. Particularly for a lot of the knives I've purchased in the past, yeah, that would be a budget knife. Now, one of the things you need to be careful about, I'm not going to read all the manufacturer's specifications. There are other reviews that go through specific measurements. You can get that from the manufacturer's website. But I do want to point out the specific steel that is used in this knife, which is Sandvik 14C28N. High chromium, stainless. This can be sharpened or honed to an extremely sharp edge, and it will hold that edge for an extended period of time. However, it's not going to be the easiest knife you've ever sharpened, particularly if you have to rely on sharpening a knife out in the field where you may not have access to premium sharpening gear. So my belief is that it's great for occasional use over short periods of time where you know it's going to maintain its edge over that period of use. And yeah, if you hit that point that it needs to be resharpened, you can either do it with your premium home gear, or you can be lazy like me and, take it to a professional knife sharpener. Now, I know I'm going to get asked this question, so let's take care of it right now. How sharp is it? This is right out of the box. All I did was a quick strop with a leather belt, and that's it. Average printer paper. Yeah, that's right out of the box. Next, I'm going to take this knife out to the LBJ grasslands. We're going to take a close-up look of the knife, the handle. We'll talk a lot about the sheath as well as some other sheathing options, and then we will put it through a stress, actually torture, test. Well, good morning and welcome back. It's now 1 week later after filming the previous segment. We are at the LBJ grasslands outside of Decatur, Texas, and we're going to continue with our evaluation of the knife. I've been carrying it for 1 week now in different configurations, altering each day between cross draw one day, right hip the next day. So I have a week of usage with the product, but today is going to be all about field testing. Now, before we get into the specific testing, let's say you've decided that you're interested in a particular knife. Okay, I've checked out all the characteristics, potential use cases, and so forth, and I really think that this knife is for me. Well, right after that, the two things that really matter a lot to me personally are feel and balance. The knife really has to feel good in my hand. It has to feel like it's an extension of my hand if I'm going to use it as a tool. Now, this G10 grip has just a bit, not much, but a bit of a bulge. I'm used to a much flatter profile with my SE4. Even so, when I first put this knife in my hand, I'll have to say it feels incredibly comfortable. It feels very natural in my hand. Balance point, this is a bit non-scientific, but it's roughly right about that first finger joint in the grip. I like that because it's very convenient for doing one-handed grip changes. So I'd have to say, very good feel, very good balance. Now what I'd want to do is show you some close-ups and do a quick comparison to the SE4. Okay, here we are, SE4 versus the F-118. You'll see in terms of overall length and blade length, these are very close, slightly longer length with the ESEE. You'll notice that flatter grip that I was talking about. Definitely see the difference between the rounded spine versus that thicker, flatter top on the SE. The jimping here is okay, but it's just okay. I mean, my thumb really slides off that. On the SE, it's much more pronounced. So you see these two are very close. In fact, I want to show you something very quick. This is about a mid-tier leather holster that was made for the SE4. And you'll see that the F-118 fits literally like it was made for this. So these knives are close enough that some of the third-party leather holsters may, or excuse me, sheaths may all fit this as well. And on the subject of sheaths, we'll talk about that in the next chapter. I just want to point out a couple more things about the knife itself. You can see the stone-washed finish there. You'll notice the swedging, and again, the rounded spine, but there's very good close-up. Okay, yeah, let's talk about that stock sheath that comes with this product. All right, here is the sheath that comes with the product. This is not kydex. I believe it is an ABS plastic, although it appears to be relatively sturdy. I wore it in a couple different configurations. No real comfort issues with it. You'll notice that probably the big feature back here is that you have this adjustable belt strap. So you can push this lever in, move this around, then it will click into place. So that gives you quite a few different carry options. However, I'll point out that it does give a couple potential points of failure for long-term use, right? If this pivots, it has to pivot around something, which is relatively small, and then if this is your adjustment and lock, both of these are going to take wear and tear over time. How long will this hold up? I don't know. We'll probably do a bit of stress testing today. You have very nice, good textured area here to push off with your thumb, and you also have adjustable tension. All right, we're going to start with just a couple very simple cut tests. I have every confidence that this knife is a good cutting instrument. I've seen other videos. It's been used in batoning, wood carving. We saw the original cut test in the prior clips. So this is not so much about cutting as it is how does the knife feel in my hand when I am cutting. So we're back to that issue of how does this feel to use as a tool. I don't want to feel that I'm fighting my gear. I want to feel like my gear is working with me. So first thing we're going to do is start out with some just very simple strap cuts. This is something that I would expect to be rather easy. And in fact, yeah, it cuts through that like butter. I'm going to hold in a little looser grip now. Let's say I got a little bit lazy. Yeah, it's still just going right through that. Again, it feels almost like moving the knife through air, which is, if this is a good tool, this is what it should feel like. Next, we're going to do another warm-up, but it will be a much tougher cut. Okay, this is sterling 12.5 millimeter nylon. This is a pretty thick road. I would expect to take 2 or 3 good passes at it to make a cut. It's not going to be one smooth move all the way through. If it is, this is the most magnificent knife in the history of knives. But this is a pretty significant cut test. Wow, I'm impressed. I would have expected at least 2, and it went right through there with very little effort. So very impressive cutting tool, but more importantly, it felt very, very natural, like the knife is indeed an extension of my hand. All right, that was a good warm-up. Let's go through some more extensive tests. All right, this is a tip test. As you can see, I've already done this once. I'm going to take the knife and I'm going to jab it repeatedly into the wood and move it back and forth. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, do you have any need to do that in search and rescue? Well, there's a reason I showed that tree clearing example at the beginning of this review. You might remember there were two big forks in that tree and I had to cut through one of them. Now, do you think I hacked all the way through that? Now, I'm too lazy for that. What I did is I repeatedly jabbed and moved around until I found a good soft spot. And generally in a fallen tree, yeah, you can find a soft spot. Once I found that soft spot, nice V cut, another one on the bottom, put some weight on it, broke right off. So yes, this is something I may have to do in search and rescue. If you're interested, these are Mechanics Impact gloves, impact and 360 cut resistant. All right, here we go. Second point test. All right, there we go. No break. I don't see even the slightest, not even the slightest indication of rolling or any other damage to the blade or tip. All right, let's do another interesting cut test. So our next test is going to involve this 1 1/8 inch oak dowel. Now you might wonder, what in the world am I going to do with this and how does it relate to search and rescue? There's always that period where search transitions into rescue. I don't do a lot of bushcraft and survival stuff, but it may be the case that if I find somebody and they're immobile or have extremely limited mobility, I'm going to have to construct some sort of minimal shelter around where they are. And unlike a bushcraft or even a survival situation where I may have considerable flexibility in choosing where I shelter, I don't have hardly any flexibility in search and rescue. Wherever the downed person is, that's where I have to try and construct some sort of shelter. And it may be very simple, like right now we have a lot of shade. But imagine if this was a wide open area, instead of mid-September, it was mid-July, and it's on its way to 105 degrees here in Texas. This person is down right here. I need to keep them from cooking in the sun. So just something real simple, get a stake in the ground, anywhere in the ground, then I can use this to build some sort of primitive covering. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to put you through watching this. I'm going to cut this into a bit of a point that I'm going to have to use the knife to make an initial opening in this very hard ground, get that stake down into the ground. Then once I have it firmly in the ground, we're going to completely cut through this. I'm going to use the magic of editing and get the setup done and be back in just a few seconds. Okay, I moved positions. The sun is shifting. I think this is a little bit better position to film. And it was really not fair to try to do any type of digging out in that area. It's just nothing but rock all the way down. So I dug a minimal hole here. I'm going to use this to brace the dowel on. I don't anticipate a catastrophic failure of the knife, but just in case, I've got both gloves on, and this test, I won't be evaluating the feel of the knife. We're just going to be hacking into this dowel until I get tired or I break through, one of the two. This is solid oak, by the way. Unfortunately, the grip with these gloves isn't very great, so this may be taking me a little bit longer than it might otherwise, but it's also saving some impact on my hands. Okay, well, I could keep going, but that's a lot of abuse. I want to get this right in the sun here. I'm looking for any signs of damage or rolling, and I'm seeing just a hint of something right in here, but if anything, it's, no, that's just a mark that was left by the dowel itself. Let's look at the other side. Yeah, that's looking real good. So there's some basic cut and tip tests for you, some things that I might actually have to do in search and rescue. Now let's take this back to the home studio. I'm going to strop the blade. We'll do one final cut test and then a wrap up. All right, before I leave, I did say I wanted to do some stress testing of this sheath. I've only worn it for a week. It doesn't even make any difference if I'd worn it for a month or 2 months. It still might fail 9 months later, and I cannot afford failures of equipment out in the field. So the best I can do right now is to put it through some very serious abuse and try to simulate many months of wear and tear and see how it does. It does impress me as being, very solidly constructed. Hey, let's find out. Turn it over. Let's take a ride. Okay, that finally did it. Would you do that with a knife? No, of course you wouldn't, but I do want to make a point about kydex and to some extent some plastics. They may last, and you'll see this till swivels and locks. So the points that I thought would fail didn't fail. It failed in a stress test of a hard impact in this direction, probably from a microfracture here from some of the testing. Again, that is far more abuse than I think anyone would ever put a knife through, and the mechanism itself held up. So the fact that this failed, honestly, I kind of expected that. That's not unique in any way. this held up real well. The core mechanism itself is still working. So that leads me to believe you could probably get some very extended use out of this. But there's only one way to find out where the edge of the envelope is, and that's to go out and test. And that's why I do these reviews. All right, let's get back to the home studio, clean strop that blade, and retest the sharpness level. All right, we are back. A very interesting exercise. Well, I have the knife. First question is it still sharp after everything that we put it through? If so, how sharp is it? All I did was a quick strop with a leather belt. We have our printer paper here. Let's find out. Okay, not nearly as good as when the knife came directly out of the box. That's probably to be expected given the level of abuse that we put the knife through. However, it does allow me to make or re-emphasize a point. At some point, you're going to need to hone this blade. Now, the good news is after everything that I put it through, I got my reading glasses out, 2x magnification, went through it in fine detail. There is not one hint of damage to the edge. It does not need to be reprofiled. It simply needs to be honed. But that type of steel is one of many that was originally designed to cut decks of cards. I mean, 52 playing cards, that's pretty thick. Imagine cutting that over and over and over and over and over. And that type of equipment was designed to be taken offline temporarily, sharpened with very specific equipment. So it's not the type of thing that you sharpen or hone casually. With the gear that I typically carry to hone a knife out in the field, that would be quite a challenge to get it back pretty close to that factory condition. So that's something to think about. Exactly what are you purchasing this knife for? Think about people who are really into bushcraft, people who go out in the wilderness and they go for days or even weeks, right? You're going to have to go through many cycles of using your knife, honing the knife, using the knife, honing the knife over and over and over. So again, think a lot about your actual use cases of the knife before getting too excited about how sharp it is right out of the box. Now, regarding the sheath, yeah, I destroyed it, but in some respects I get paid to destroy things. That's where I find out where the edge of the envelope is. And in search and rescue, that's very important because it is serious business. I don't want to try and sound melodramatic, but we often deal with time-critical situations where time elements can be the dividing line between someone surviving or me turning search and rescue into search and body recovery. So I tend to take gear very seriously. Gear kind of means something a little bit different to me than it may to a person who just goes out on a casual day hike. Now, in summary, I still think everything I said in the beginning is true. This is an excellent general purpose, utility, or number two knife. Think of it as a jack of all trades, perhaps master of none, but a very usable knife that under somewhat infrequent casual use cases, you may never have to hone that blade for the entire time that you own it. That particular sheath will probably hold up for most uses, perhaps for years. Now, I do want to point out that that particular material, your enemy is microfracture. Microfractures typically occur very slowly over time. They can occur from constant exposure to expanding during heat, then contracting. UV is another thing. I fly drones. I'm constantly checking my props for microfractures because they get a lot of UV exposure. And you may think, well, but it's going to take an impact to get any type of microfracture going, and you're probably right. Will you take an impact like we had today? I doubt it. You can take some pretty serious ones. That gully that I showed you at the beginning of the review where I did that tree clearing, I came down the other side one day. It had rained about 3 days earlier. That's mostly dirt, doesn't get a lot of sun. So you get a situation where the top layers of the dirt dry out, but it's still wet underneath. And if you can hit it just right at the right angle, it will slide out under you, kind of like a mini avalanche. That happened to me. I was going down, turn to the side just like I should, very slowly. I had a good footing, and just as I shifted my weight slightly, the ground came out from underneath me. Now, I anticipated it, didn't have any problem with the fall, made it more of a roll, but the primary impact I took was right back here. My knife hit one of the few rocks that was exposed out from the ground. Now, it didn't do anything to the knife, it didn't do anything to my leather sheath other than scuff it. Probably saved me a nice little bruise, but the point is that was a very significant impact. I weigh about 165, 170, a light loadout, 25, maybe 30 pounds of a gear. So yes, there are instances if you get out long enough, a lot of things can happen to you. You will take impacts like that. So those are just some things to think about. Now, on the subject of think about, I did show you a leather sheath option. I do use some leather gear. So here's a bonus point for you. If you're thinking about leather, I typically tell people don't, because leather is one of those things, unlike, say, kydex, where you can go middle of the road with kydex and you can get years and years and years of usage out of something. Leather, you need to go to the high end or not at all. That can be very expensive. If you try to go mid to low tier, you're just wasting your money. But if you're willing to pay to go high end enough, it could really pay off for you. One case in point, this is my Tucker & Bird leather holster. I bought this for my 10 mil back in 2014. It has been out in all ranges of temperature for hours and hours on end, 95, 100 plus with humidity. I even had this out in the polar vortex for over 2 hours, 9 degrees, sub-zero wind chill. I'm going to talk about moisture in addition to the Texas humidity. I wore this during my cold water training. My instructor, who is force recon, put me through an exercise very similar to what he went through. This was exposed underwater, completely submerged for 8 minutes. Came out, let it dry, keep going. It's a little softer than it was 8 years ago. 8 years ago it was incredibly stiff, but I could probably still get another couple of years out of this, and I've had it for 10 years. Expense, here's your custom molded kydex holster. Yeah, keep going. So you may have some additional carry options with some third-party SAR sheaths like I showed you earlier today, but hopefully that just gives you a whole bunch of things to think about before you run out and make a purchase. I just want to make sure that you make an informed purchase. Again, in summary, I think this is an excellent value for the dollar knife, even with the sheath that comes with it. Once again, I want to thank Gear for Life for providing me with the knife and making this review possible. I appreciate you putting up with me for so long. And until the next review, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for watching the video.